Well, as expected, the Britney Brigade is up in arms about our podcast, which dared to suggest that they need to have all their facts in check before continuing on this outrageous Free Britney campaign. And one of those Britney warriors is on the line with me now after describing me as, quote, misguidedly condescending in a comment on YouTube. I appreciate you being on the show, B, but I don't think you really had your listening ears on when you listened to our podcast.
I think there's just a lot that was glossed over. I understand if you were to pose your podcast or your episode as a review of the documentary itself, but I think
isn't that exactly what it is? Hang on.
I think
hold on a sec.
Go for it.
Point number one, because let's deconstruct this point one at a time.
Sure.
If you can't listen to the first two sentences of the podcast and understand that it's a critique of the documentary, because I blatantly say that this is a critique of the documentary, then you haven't got your listening ears on.
No, and I agree, but if you'd allow me to finish my sentence, if you'd posed the episode as a review of just the documentary, I'd completely be on board with everything that you said.
That's what it is. That's what it does.
But that isn't how the conversation unfolded between you and Rocco.
It's set up from the beginning, and right at the end, it's absolutely bookended, I should say, by me talking about I've just finished watching the documentary and the documentary makers have been misleading in the way that they've presented the facts. That's the whole conversation.
And I think my argument to that was it's important to recognize the purpose of the documentary and what it was there to do to begin with, which is obviously, if anybody knows how PR works, it's to elicit an emotional response. And I believe it served its purpose. But yes, fans are well aware that it did not dive into the details and did not cover a lot of items that we wish were covered.
What I find interesting about fanatics of any fan group, in this case the Britney Brigade, is how reflex response they are when anybody has something different to say about their star. That documentary was dangerous. Full stop, dangerous. The Free Britney movement is dangerous because what it is allowing is a bunch of people like yourself probably to march and chant down the streets with their banners and their placards and putting a vulnerable person at risk. And you're not privy to the medical facts, to the assessments, to the clinical advice that the greater public simply isn't and shouldn't be aware of.
So if I can agree with you on the fact that that could be seen as dangerous, and I would object to being labeled as fanatic, if that's okay. I don't consider myself a fanatic.
It's a definition of fan, B.
I would relate to exactly what you've said, which is ultimately having the best interest of the safety, the health and security of the conservatee, which is the intention of the Free Britney movement, which I feel the documentary, yes, may have played a role in misconstruing, just because, that's what sells, that's what gains clicks, and it's really easy to dismiss people in that manner. But originally, and what I was trying to set out to do with my commentary on that first episode was really bring to light the core of the movement and its purpose. It isn't simply to just yell Free Britney and kind of dismiss all fact and logic. It's really to force and pressure those people in power that we have clear documentation have abused, the legal system in order to do this, to show them that people are listening, people are watching, and actually just as early as yesterday, we can see the documentary has had an effect because the courts have actually granted co-conservatorship of Britney's finances and her estate along with her father, which was not happening before. This media circus, as you so call it, actually brought all this to attention. It's necessary with any movement, no matter how big or small, to have those people that are super outspoken, maybe questionably so.
If I were you, I would be furious then because your description of the Free Britney movement is at odds with the documentary.
Which is why I said just before this conversation, I'm not actually sure what we're here to debate because it seems we agree on the fundamentals, right? And the fundamentals that I'm bringing to you are what the Free Britney movement are about. For someone that's been following the movement for a year and a half now. I was there on Instagram Lives when fans were outside the courts. They were Instagram living. They were reporting exactly the facts as they came in live. It wasn't sort of sensationalized. It was very matter of fact, exactly as items we're developing. Again, I was highly personally disappointed with the documentary, but I've come to, conclude that it served its purpose. And unfortunately, a lot of the masses are not interested in the finer details of court proceedings, to be honest, to be frank. That would not have garnered the same attention. So ultimately, it was necessary for it to be framed in that way, because it ignited masses. It prompted social engagement on social media. There was a 377% increase in Free Britney searches. It's actually exceeded COVID searches, which is insane. And I just don't think it would have it wouldn't have elicited that same response had it not been for its, almost radical or fanatical nature, if that makes sense. But I want to be very careful of stating that isn't actually what the movement is advocating for. We're advocating ultimately for the safety and just treatment of the conservatee, no matter what that entails, whether it's, being completely out of the conservatorship if she's deemed fit enough, or whether having her wishes granted to not have her abusive father be the conservator of her person, which is what she's simply requesting.
B, you're saying that we fundamentally agree now that we're face-to-face, so to speak, yet in your comment, you've called me totally hypocritical, showing faux concern, that I'm misguidedly condescending throughout the conversation, and yet now that we're face-to-face, you're telling me you fundamentally agree with what I have to say.
Well,
my question to you would be, if you fundamentally agree with what I've said in the podcast, why the nasty Britney-esque fanatical comments underneath the video, which I don't resent. It just seems to me that it's easy when you're at the keyboard to write the things that you've written, yet now face to face, you're completely saying that you're on board with what I'm saying.
It's a good question. It's a good question, and let me clarify as to why it does add up. What we agree on is that ultimately we want the best for Britney Spears. Right. That is what we agree on foundationally.
Not according to your comment. In your comment, you describe my concern as faux concern, as if I have no regard for Britney Spears or her family.
I absolutely do. I think that where you show your disregard is that you're attempting to frame her as an unfit parent, jumping to those types of conclusions, when what we know for fact is that the unfit parent in this scenario is in fact the person that's been assigned as the adult. But I think we can get to an understanding. If you would allow me to present you facts, I can probably sway you.
Yeah, and absolutely. I'm going to give you that opportunity, but don't put words in my mouth, please. I have never said that the parent, who I believe his name is Jamie,
That's
is
right.
appropriate or that he's not abusive. I had made no comment on that at all in the podcast. So the fact that you have extrapolated that from what I've said in the podcast is actually outrageous.
To be fair, I've never listened to your podcast before, and I don't mean that in a rude way, but
you listened to this one.
Exactly. The way that I came across it was posted on a forum, right, with Britney fans that actually were commenting on the episode, and that is the vibe that they actually picked up from the episode as well. They felt it was highly condescending.
Rely on your own conclusions.
I have listened to the episode, and I also did find it quite condescending because you weren't letting Rocco complete, his sentences. You were also jumping to your own conclusions without really being based in any type of fact or considering where the Free Britney movement was coming from. You framed us at the beginning of this episode before you'd even said a word to me. You've called me a radical fanatic. So that is condescending.
No,
I'm afraid.
Again, a misrepresentation once again, B. B, let me tell you this. You've said, and you've put yourself out there as a spokesman for Britney fans, right? And I just don't agree with you.
I speak for myself.
You've already said twice now that Britney fans and the Free Britney movement isn't trying to null and void her conservatorship. It's actually just trying to transfer the conservatorship from one abusive person to somebody else who may be safe. That's correct. Not. Yes, that's your opinion. That is absolutely not the fundamental belief of most people who believe in Free Britney. Those ones that march down the street, most of them just for the fun of it, with their placards and their pink banners, they're not trying to transfer conservatorship. B, don't pee on my leg and tell me.
And what are you basing that on? What are you basing that on exactly?
On the hundreds of YouTube clips that I've watched from fans who say that it should be cancelled and that she should be free and that she should be able to make her own decisions. Don't tell me you haven't seen them. I haven't watched one of those videos that say what you've just said, which is, actually, the Free Britney movement should be a transfer of conservatorship, which, by the way, is a sensible possibility. It's actually something that we should look at, and I'm going to let you talk about it. But please don't say that the Free Britney movement in spirit is about the transfer of conservatorship. Anyone listening to this would find that absolutely ridiculous. Free Britney, it's in the words, Free Britney. Null and void the conservatorship is what most people mean by that.
Okay, so again, Free Britney is a branding term, right? It was started as the podcast, and just like, for example, abolish police, it doesn't actually mean abolish police. It's used to draw attention to the movement.
So abolish police movement is not abolish police.
No, it's actually about the reallocation of funds. It's not about abolishing the police completely.
For God's sake.
But that's a different conversation to have.
Different conversation.
Yes.
Tell me about why you think that this man is so abusive, and why you think I've seemed to be an advocate for Jamie from the podcast that you listened to, where I barely even mentioned his name because I didn't really even know what it was.
Well, if it's okay, I will definitely answer this question. I'd just like to touch on the Free Britney movement advocates that I've spoken to are the ones that have actually been at those marches, that I've watched hold their lives and their protests for the last year and a half. And I can absolutely say that their intent isn't just, frivolous or anything not based in fact or reality. It is, in fact, to have the best intention for Britney Spears.
You can have good intentions, B. You can have all the good intentions in the world, but if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be tinkering in there. There are surgeons who aren't qualified to perform surgery, and they tinker around inside people, and they go, oops, I made a mistake. All the people that march down the street, not one of them has read the files and the assessments and the reviews and the medical reports that were relied upon to make the decision to put the conservatorship in place.
In the podcast that I had an issue with, you had said you had raised concern that Britney may be an unfit mother, or maybe have a history of abusing her children or harming herself, allegedly. And I know that you said allegedly. We don't know what's in them, but I don't believe that she'd be advocating for them to be made public if they in any way reflected that type of, It was unconstitutional for her not to be able to elect her own representative from the beginning, to be honest. And Adam Streisand was the person she elected.
I have to take you up.
It is, in fact,
unconstitutional. How many years are we talking now, right? It's been more than 10? Is that about right? More than 10 years since
it's been about 12 years. It was since 2008.
Okay. So one would think that if in 12 years, if something unconstitutional happened 12 years ago, that the legal system would have deemed it so. So you throw out statements like that, and it undermines credibility.
You would think so.
Where has it been proven that it's unconstitutional? Show me where it was deemed unconstitutional, and you won't be able to, because it never was.
Very simply, US law states that you have the right to elect your own attorney.
My friend, someone needs to deem it unconstitutional for it to be so, not just because you interpret it that way.
The Constitution is written. It's black and white. Since we're going into the legal system, that is also the issue that Free Britney movement has a problem with, and is trying to highlight that there's severe abuse and wrongdoing going on here. So the court rejected Adam Streisand, and do you know who they put in his place? They put in Samuel Ingham. Samuel Ingham has a history of abuse with the conservatives that he's looked after before. In fact, I've got a report right here from Media One Entertainment where we have leaked emails that he's been sued for, and he went through the court proceedings and everything. And if you'd allow me to quote, this is a person called Scott Winship, right? And the email reads, he's writing to Samuel Ingham, and he says, at this point, it looks like providing hydration and nutrition would only result in causing Mr. Kassem to die more quickly and with much less comfort. Mr. Kassem in this scenario is the conservatee that Samuel Ingham was responsible for. Samuel Ingham's response to this email was, Scott, this is great. He was actually sued for this. So there's like a history here. There's a lot more to it. There's a history of corruption that's going on here.
Now, tell me about Jamie. I mean, because you've made all kinds of claims in your comments there to say that he's abusive, he's this and he's that.
Well, they're not claims, they're facts, right?
Before you go any further, B, I really hope for your sake that these are substantiated claims that you're about to make, because...
Well, absolutely. And it's very easy to, because it was said in the documentary. And very recently is why Britney lost a lot more of her visitation rights with her children, because it was very widely reported and documented. And it's actually part of the reason that Jamie stepped down temporarily as conservator was because he physically abused her son. And there was a restraining order filed against him by Kevin Federline, the son's father. And now she cannot see her children because of this man.
Okay, Gregory Toten, he's the district attorney. He issued a press release. Tell me where this adds up with what you've just said. He said there will not be criminal charges pursued against Jamie Spears. Because, why? Because there is insufficient proof that a criminal offence has occurred. So you're telling me he's a child abuser, yet it's not true. This is actually defamation. So
on what grounds do you believe the restraining order was granted then?
A restraining order is not a criminal offence. I could grant a restraining order against you for your abusive comments below my post in YouTube. Does not make you a criminal if I take an AVO against you. So to call him and frame him as a child abuser, which I'm not defending the man, okay? I'm just saying that sweeping statements like that are what undermine the credibility of Britney fans. You cannot say Jamie is a child abuser. He has never been charged with that, yet alone convicted of it.
Okay.
Child abuser is outrageous.
All right, well, let me challenge you then. Britney's own son actually was on Instagram, filmed a video, and stated as such. So what now?
Listen, to be labelled a child abuser, you have to be convicted of it in a court of law.
Are you telling me that there are no child abusers running around out there? That people haven't filed restraining orders against abusive parents, against abusive spouses or siblings, and that makes them any less innocent or fit to actually have full control over that particular person? Are you saying that's perfectly okay and that there's no sort of legal issue there? That makes no sense.
I'm making no commentary on what Jamie has or hasn't done because unlike you, I'm not aware of the facts, so therefore my hands are up. I don't know if he is a good conservator. I don't know if he's been abusive to children. That's my point. I'm not arrogant or reckless enough to label him any which way because he has not been convicted in a court of law. He hasn't had his right of reply, and fans like you are calling him a child abuser.
Well, he has in fact been forced to step down temporarily as conservator because of this incident.
No, don't play with definitions here. He's been forced to step down because of the terms of the conservatorship. Nothing to do with child abuse. Come on, B, get real. I hope he's listening to it because he could have you up on defamation charges. You can't go calling people child abusers when they haven't been convicted.
Okay, if you say so. So I've made my case on that. The next bit is mismanaging her money. So he was responsible for her finances and he actually wasted a whole lot of them. We don't even know where half of her money has gone. Her net worth, according to the documentary, is $60 million, which isn't true. He was in a legal battle with Elizabeth Arden and owed them millions because he just wasn't even paying them. So how do you deem someone like that responsible enough to take care of a $60 million estate? Britney is advocating for a whole host of court documents and they're actually undergoing, revision at the moment by Bessemer Trust, who were just granted, yesterday, joint rights to review her estate and her finances. So we'll see what actually comes out of that because a lot of those finances are now being reviewed to see if there is anything shady that has gone on.
See, in one breath, you've made a conclusion and then you go on to say it's in the process of review. So what is it? You've started with a conclusion and now you're saying it's in a process of review. Don't you want to wait and see if the evidence is there? I mean, if he is, I'll be the first one linking arms with your brigade and saying he is a criminal. He should not be allowed to be a conservator for anybody. But you've reached the conclusion, as Britney fans tend to do, before the review has occurred.
No, but I've already cited what we actually know, which is already that he's proven that he mismanages her money because he had brought upon this legal battle with Elizabeth Arden, who she'd never had an issue with before, and owed them millions.
If the man is proven to be guilty of anything, I'll stand with all of you in George Street in Sydney.
I'm not calling him guilty. I'm calling him incompetent. That's something I can actually say. Unfit to be her conservator, which is what the movement is arguing.
Well, again, that's my argument with you, B. I don't believe that's what the movement actually stands for. I don't believe that in that documentary I saw any advocacy for a transfer of conservatorship. It was very clear for the whole hour and a half they were calling for Britney to be freed, full stop, null and void, no more conservatorship. That's what half the people were talking about. We need her to be free to make her own decisions. That would imply very strongly they're not asking for someone else to take control. They're asking for it to be null and void.
I believe I believe in the documentary there was a fan that actually, and obviously we're not a monolith. People are going to have their own views, but there was a fan that actually did call out and say, if Britney were to come out and say that she's for the conservatorship and she doesn't want out, or if something were to come out to suggest that, yes, she is unfit, we'd absolutely support her, but we still want the best intentions and we wouldn't want her father in charge.
I also heard exactly the same fan that you're talking about saying if Britney sends us a code and it makes it really clear that she doesn't want to be in this, we'll fight for her. I mean, that's a scary, dangerous, reckless decision because, again, people who say that, fans like yourself and fans like the one in the documentary, are not privy to the documents that form the rationale for the decision being made. And believe me, they'd make your hair fall out when you eventually do get to read them.
This is the same system that's supporting, and this is a quote from a court document, that this is now a business hybrid conservatorship model. That doesn't exist. That's never existed before. That by its very nature goes against the purpose and intention of what a conservatorship is supposed to be.
So what do you want to see done at this point, B?
At this point, I would like for Britney's wishes to be granted, and what her lawyer is advocating for.
What are Britney's wishes?
The removal of Jamie Spears as the conservator of her person.
And that's what you believe the Free Britney movement is all about. Just the removal of one man and then everything's going to be hunky-dory and there'll be no more protests.
That's absolutely not true. That's not what I said. It's going to be a long-haul sort of battle. But we want things to be as transparent and as fair and as just as possible. And what we can see, because this has gone on for 12 years, is that there hasn't been fair treatment in this case. It has not been just. There's been a lot of money going around, a lot of money to be made by a lot of leeches, and some very questionable behavior by both the judge and the lawyers.
Okay, well, look, you made your comments under YouTube, and I thought they were outrageously rude and as if you had not listened to the podcast. But to your credit, you stumped up, you accepted the invitation to come on the show and put your point of view forward, and you have. And I totally respect that. Thank you.
Thank you.